My name is Anna. I work as a designer and developer at Kultbyrå here in Oslo, in Norway. So we are a small design and technology agency. So we primarily work with designing and developing visual identities, logo design, some animation, but primarily we do web design and web development. And we've been using Sanity for around 3.5 years now. And one thing that is really important to us and that we take great pride in is to create intuitive and great editing experiences for our customers, which in turn makes our customers love Sanity just as much as we do. So, a pretty common case for our customer projects is the fact that they administer more than one website. And oftentimes, when they come to us, these websites are administered completely separately. Sometimes they don't share the same code base. So, sometimes they're just in completely different systems altogether. But our customers might have the wish or the goal or need to be able to share and reuse the content that they have across all of their websites. So, of course, our goal is to make it as simple and intuitive for our customers to administer all of their websites in a unified way from the same place and to be able to share the content that they have across all of their sites. So, what I'm going to show you today is a couple of different projects where this has been the case, where we have used Sanity for our customers to manage more than one website from the same studio. So these are the projects that I'm going to walk through today. From oldest to newest, we have CEF, or the Collaboration Forum for Aesthetic Subjects, which was actually one of the very first projects that we did using Sanity. And this project consists of 10 websites. And then we have Pårørendealliansen, which is an organization that works to promote the rights of next of kin, so people that are caretakers for their friends or family. And they currently have 4 websites. And lastly, we have a project that we're actually working on in this very moment, so it's pretty fresh, which is Homestart, an organization of volunteers that support families with small children through challenging phases of life. And they have 2 websites. So for all of these projects, we have gone with some slightly different approaches to make all of this multi-site stuff work. So we're gonna have a look at how we've built the studios for these 3 projects to enable our customers, the editors, to manage all of their website from the same studio as well as the same Sanity project. So first of all, we need to define our site somehow. So for our first project, CEF, we decided to define our sites using documents in Sanity. So we have a schema type called domain, could also be called site. And here we have a document list of all of our domains. And deep down in our structure here, we have the actual domain document. So this is document type domain, which consists of some basic configuration for the site. So logo, favicon. And we can see that the structure here is the same for all of our sites. So the benefit with this approach is that our customer, the editor themselves, actually can create new sites themselves and start to fill them with content without ever having to reach out to us to do so. So for this customer specifically, that has actually proven to be quite useful because they are slowly moving one by one site over from their old system and into Sanity. But I mean, at some point, they have to reach out to us to connect this new site to a front end for us to set up a Vercel project or similar, or to even launch it. And for most customers, the case is that they will probably have a process with us before even thinking about creating a new site. Maybe it's not very common for our customers to just push out new websites like it's a factory band. And also for this approach, every site has to be in the same workspace in Sanity to preserve the capability for the editor to be able to create new sites themselves. Because as of now, as far as I know, there is no way of dynamically creating workspaces. Because I just really like the idea of having a separate workspace for each site. I think it makes it tighter and allows the editor to focus more on what they're currently working with. So I think it would be really cool if it was possible to dynamically create workspaces based on a graph query, for instance. So for our next project, Pårørendealliansen, we wanted to test out having separate workspaces for each site. So in this little weirdly named file called sanity string consts, we have an array here defining our workspaces. So each object here is actually both a workspace as well as a site. And then in our sanity config file for this project, on top here, we have some config that is shared across all of our workspaces, so all of our sites, as well as some shared plugins. And then we are manually defining a workspace for each of our 4 sites, and then collecting them here to form our workspaces. So this is what that looks like in the studio. So I really like how this feels in the studio with one workspace for each site. I think from an editing perspective, it makes a lot of sense to separate them in this way. But I mean, as time went on, we figured that it was possible to improve a little on the setup of our sites and the code. So for Homestart, our third project, we have a very similar definition of our sites, but here we call them sites in capital letters because technically, of course, you could also have a workspace that is not a separate website, but that is used for something else entirely. So it is a little confusing to call our site workspaces because, I mean, after all, workspace is a term that is already used for something else. So here we have the site definitions for our Homestart project, which is 2 sites. And then here in our sanity config file for this project, we have a function here that is responsible for creating a workspace for each site. So down here in our define config, we are actually looping over all of our sites defined in this file and creating a workspace automatically for each and every one of them. So most of the configuration for the workspaces is the same for all sites, with the exception of the icon, as well as the structure. So this variable here, with TypeScript, we're making sure that there actually exists a structure for each site that we have specified. So in our studio, let's see, the look and feel of this is exactly the same as the previous project, but now our code is a little bit tighter. It makes more sense, and it requires a bit fewer steps to actually get a new site up and running in the studio. And then, as I mentioned, on a project like these, where you can manage more sites from the same studio, there might be some content that you want to share between one or more sites, and some content that should belong to one site only. So we need a way to know which documents belong to which sites. So for Ceph, our first project, since each domain or each site is defined by a document, then let's see. Then each schema type that should belong to one site only has a reference field to reference the site it should belong to. So for instance, pages, which are typical one-offs, they typically belong to one site only. The schema type has a reference field here on the very top that is referencing this site. Whereas for schema types that should be shared across all of our sites, so typically resources, this is learning material that should be available for all of these sites. So this schema type does not have any reference field at all. So this document doesn't really know or care which website it actually belongs to. And then we have some schema types that should be shared between some sites, but maybe not all. So for those cases, we have an array of references. So this document can actually belong to multiple websites. And then, of course, we want to make this all a little smoother for the editor. We don't want to have them to make this choice every time they create a new document. After all, they've already selected here which site they want to work on, so that context should really be enough. So we have some initial value templates in place to make that happen. So here we have an initial value template. So here we are manually specifying all of the schema types that should be connected to one site only. And down here, we are manually specifying the schema types that are connected to multiple domains. And then we have these functions that are responsible for creating initial value templates for each of these schema types, and then populating either the single reference field or the array of reference field with this domain ID parameter. And this domain ID parameter we get from our structure. So as remember, for this project, every domain has the same structure here. So if we go and view this, let's see. So this is the top structure where we list all of our domains. And then for each domain, we receive the document ID from the structure, which we then pass down into this single domain structure. And then we continue to pass this domain ID down into this helper function here. And this helper function is then responsible for actually using this initial value template that we just made, as well as filtering the document list so that we only see the relevant documents per site. So for instance, if we go to pages here, these are only the pages that have this site in this reference field, and the same goes if we go to another site. And then if I want to create a new page, then this field is automatically populated with the correct value. And then we have our second project, which is Pårørendealliansen. And for this project, all of this is actually happening in the structure itself. So as we remember, in this project here, each site, so each workspace has its own separate structure. So if we go into this one, so on top here, we are specifying which workspace name, and this type we get from our definition of our workspace file here. So which workspace name this structure belongs to. And then we pass this variable down into our substructures, for instance, pages. And then what is going on here is actually that we are creating a prefix for all of our documents within the structure. And that prefix is the workspace name, so the current workspace we're in. And let's see how that looks like in our studio. So if we go to pages here, we can see that this document has a prefix in its idea, and this prefix is the same as the name of the workspace that we're currently in. And the same goes, so if we switch, we can see that also this prefix is reflected. And then for schema types that are supposed to be shared between all of these sites, then those schema types do not have this prefix. For instance, news, we can see, well, they don't have this prefix. So similar to Ceph, we also have some filters in place here to make sure that we only display the relevant documents. So here will only be documents of type page, which has this workspace's name as their ID prefix. But there's no initial value templates going on here. It's all happening directly in the structure right here. So for the editor, all of this seems completely seamless. They're not even aware that this sort of setup to define which document belongs to which site exists at all. And all they have to think about is selecting the site that they want to work on, and then the rest is taken care of automatically. But I mean, in hindsight, I don't think this is the prettiest solution. It feels a little hacky. It's not very flexible, and being the nature of document IDs, could possibly get a little messy if you try to fix something, if something gets messed up here. But for this project and for this purpose right now, this currently works as a charm. And then we have our final project, so Home Start. So I really liked how this approach for Pårørendedagen was feeling so smoothly for the editor, but we wanted to make the whole setup a little more flexible and future-proof. So for our third project, Home Start, we have actually added some options to the document schema specifications. So in the Sanity End file, so this is allowing us in TypeScript to pass additional options to a document schema definition. So among other things, we have this option called cross-site. So for this project, we're also assuming that most of our schema types will be specific to one site only. But where that is not the case, so for those schema types that are supposed to be shared between all of our sites by default, then we set this cross-site option to true. And then in our main schema file, so this is the file that is collecting all of our schema definitions and then collecting them in this variable that we're again using in our Sanity config file. Here we are looping over all of our document schema definitions and adding this site names field on the very top. So each and every document in our studio will now contain this field. And this is an array of strings of our website. So these strings are actually the names of our sites that we specified earlier. So if we go into this custom input component, we can see that we're actually looping over these sites from this previous file. And then our names for these sites are the options we can select between. And then we also have some validation in place here to make sure that every document is assigned to the correct number of sites. And we also have a little info field here, which is basically just a pseudo field, which is showing a little info box in case a document is assigned to more than one site, to just aware the editor that the changes they make will be reflected in more than one place. But of course, as with the other projects, we don't want the editor to have to make the choice of which document, which site the document belongs to every time they create a new one. After all, they're already selected one of the two sites, so that context will really be enough. So here, similarly to our first project, we also have some initial value templates. But here, and exactly in the same way as in our main schema file, we are here also looping over all of our document schema definitions and creating initial value templates for each and every one of them. And then here, it is responsible for populating this new site names field that we just added. And then if our schema specification is supposed to be, if our schema type is supposed to be shared across all sites by default, then this site names field will be populated with all of our sites names by default. And if it's not supposed to be shared across all sites by default, then we are using this site name parameter that we are, similarly from Ceph, getting from our structure. So as we remember from our config, each site has its own structure. So if I go into this one, so similarly to Porreralliansen, here we are specifying which site name the structure belongs to. We are then passing this variable down into this helper function here that is responsible for using this initial value template as well as doing the filtering. So here we get to populate the site names field with the correct value. So let us see how that looks like in the studio. If I create a page that is supposed to be connected to one site only by default, then we can see here we have a little field group called sites. And here we can see that it is automatically connected to the site I'm currently working on. But I can still choose to share this page with another website. And as I do so, this little info box pops up telling me that now the changes that I make will be reflected on multiple sites. And similarly, if I want to create a new subject, which should be shared across all sites by default, then we can see in our sites here that all of the sites are automatically connected to this document. But I can still choose to not share it with a site if I wish to do so. So this solution is still fully automatic and seamless for the editor, but it's a lot more flexible and future-proof. And every document is now behaving the same. So the editing experience is a lot more predictable. And of course, the coding, the querying, it will all be more predictable now that it's sort of standardized. So that was it for me. I think one of the great things about Sanity is that you're pretty free to decide how to build your schema and your studio to solve a specific problem or need. So as you saw for this specific need, we have solved it in pretty different ways. So this was sort of a little evolution of how we've done it. And each way is valid and they all work. Some has some obvious benefits or drawbacks, and it's been really fun to evolve how we think about managing multiple sites, both structurally and schematically.